Somebody has a question. You're prepared today. The QR code is not on Moodle? Is that what you're saying? Okay, yeah, don't worry about that. So the QR code service is broken. Is that what you said? Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah. Any other questions? I know that some of you are wondering, some of you do have a question, but you're too scared to ask. Oh, there it is.
When will coursework 1 grades be announced?
In about 3 weeks from the deadline.
Okay.
Yeah. There's another question that somebody's wondering. I can pick up the signal. I have beginner level psychic powers, and that you're afraid to ask. Anybody want to ask any other questions? I will go ahead and tell you what you wish you could ask. You wish that you could ask, did you start assessing coursework 1? How many people were wondering that? I know some of you were wondering that. Yes, I have started assessing coursework 1. Yeah. What I noticed so far is the biggest struggle on coursework 1 was the related work. A lot of students struggled on this aspect, identifying the core related work. So that's been the thing that stuck out to me the most. Yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments? My psychic powers tell me that the most pressing questions are answered. If there are any questions, please interrupt or ask any time. Today we're going to talk about observational and ethnographic methods and user studies. So a lot of you will probably end up doing some sort of user study in your project. If you're doing some project related to human-computer interaction, there's usually a user study. It could be an observational study. But user studies are very, very common in computer science. So some of that we're going to look at today. User studies. So observational and ethnographic methods involve observing and or participating in activities relevant to research goals, usually over a long period of time. So if we look up ethnography in the dictionary, the scientific description of peoples and cultures with their customs, habits, and mutual differences. That's a very, very broad definition. And ecology, the branch of biology that deals with the relations of organisms to one another and their physical surroundings. So these terms come up in this lecture. So I thought I would just look in the dictionary to see what the dictionary has to say about them. So these are all related. Ethnography, observation, participant observation, and field work. Sometimes these user studies are called field work, when you go out and observe people and their surroundings and how they behave. Sometimes that's called field work. They all relate to the idea that a researcher places themselves physically or virtually amongst people studying a topic being researched. So for example, if you're interested in understanding how software is developed, go to a programmer's office. Observe their behavior in front of a screen, their interactions with other staff, meetings they attend, and so on. rather than just talking to them. You go and observe them. Has anybody ever done something like this before? Observe somebody at their job? In the US, there used to be a tradition, it's no longer a tradition, but there used to be a tradition called shadowing. And you would actually go to your parents' workplace and watch your parents work for one day. You would shadow your parents, both of them. That was a long-established tradition in the US. It's no longer a long-established tradition, but it used to be. And I thought it was quite good. I think it's a very, very good idea, actually. It's very, very educational. Has anybody ever heard of that before?
Yeah.
Nice. Where did you hear about it?
When I was in primary school. When I was small.
Where were you small?
What do you mean, which year? Or
No, where? Where were you small? Like, where?
in the United Kingdom.
In the UK. Okay, so it exists in the UK somehow, or used to
I
exist.
don't think it used to be.
Okay, okay. Yeah, probably it existed in the UK at some point. So, these all involve physically or virtually observing where people do things and using observation to understand. What do people do in more detail? Why are they doing it? What do they think and feel about it? What is the social, managerial, cultural context? And how are things improved or changed? You're looking at the there and then of what people do and their expected behavior. This observation could be an end in itself. It could be part of a larger process of gathering requirements for future software, for example, or it could be the process of an evaluation and testing. It can be used in a number of different ways. So this kind of observation can be helpful all by itself. For example, you spend time observing and participating in a computer lab, hanging out in common rooms to understand how students help each other to learn programming, for example. So understanding the educational system and the educational process. It could be used to understand a user's need before you build something. So this is a good way to inform requirements specification. Everybody knows that term, requirements specification? That's like how you specify or how you document what it is you want to build. You need some sort of requirement specification. You might observe nurses carrying out diet analysis of kidney patients and note that they regularly write information onto a piece of paper, but there is no surface for them to write on. So just observing people in their environment, you can pick up things that are not very conducive to the job, right? You might introduce some improvements. You might have built a system already and you want to understand how people are interacting and behaving with that system. You can observe people using an interface to do their day-to-day tasks using new design and look for places where they struggle or where their behavior is not aligned with what you were expecting. So these are all case scenarios for ethnography and user studies. And focus groups, by the way. Those statements happen to all apply to focus groups as well. So there are lots of different kinds of these observational studies and user studies, different time scales. They might be very, very short. You can have a user study that's just 5 minutes. I wouldn't recommend a user study or an observation that's only 5 minutes, but it's possible. It could be a one-off event. You could put in a system that improves the way of wayfinding for a car, parking a car, So you spent a few hours observing how people use existing signs and talk to them about how they found their parking spot. But it could also be a long-term study. It could be something that's performed over days, weeks, or months. That's in some ways, that's kind of what an internship is, right? You spend 6 weeks at a company. You don't end up being very productive in those 6 weeks, actually. It's more just learning and observing. That's kind of a long-term ethnography. It's a training, basically. So the goal is usually to understand and improve a process, to participate in a process and draw ecologically valid conclusions. That is, ones grounded in ecology, in which the research occurs. So this may require a researcher to be embedded in a research environment for a long time to gain trust and to blend into the environment. That's possible. It's not very likely in the case of your projects, but it's possible. And this is as opposed to something like an interview, right? In this kind of studies, you might interview people and ask them a series of questions about their job or about a task or about their performance, what they're happy with, what they're not happy with. But you might also know that what people say and what people do are not the same. So the ethnography is trying to compensate for that, to watch what people do as opposed to what they say they do. Right? Every student says, oh, I work so hard on my coursework. But we can't observe them directly to see if they really worked hard on the coursework. But there's a difference between what people say and what they do. And if you're a good observer, a participant may forget that there's somebody observing, and they may lapse into their real, normal, day-to-day behavior. And this is not necessarily the same thing that somebody would say in an interview. You can also ask people, if you want it to be interactive, why they just did what they did. Right? You can easily imagine that. That's a common training scenario. By observation, you can see what people do and not what they report doing or what they should be doing. You see what they actually do. That's the idea with the observational and ethnographic research. And it adds depth to understanding the topic, right? It increases the understanding of any research topic or any task or profession. Rather than just getting evidence from a sequence of interviews, you are developing a sense of norms, language, culture within a specific group of people. And of course, there are lots of books on this topic. Again, this is one of those lectures where we're just introducing a topic, but you could take an entire module on this subject, right? There are lots of books on this subject. This is just one of the books. And there's kind of a famous observational study about photocopiers and observing people using photocopiers and all the different mistakes they make and all the different trouble they have. And that's a very old topic, right? You can see this is a very old photo. And you also watch people in the place where the behavior happens. So you're watching them in their natural settings, in their daily settings, where the behavior is supposed to happen in the case of the ethnographic research. So we mentioned this word shadowing, right? So ethnographic work is a kind of shadowing. you follow a person or a group of people around during the day, including times such as break times. So, but you can imagine doing that and learning quite a lot. It could also be participatory. In other words, you actually do something. And you might stop somebody and ask them, what are you doing? Or why are you doing this? What is this for? And so on. And this also has ethical implications. Before you do any observational study or user study, there are these ethics forms that you need to fill out and submit and have reviewed by the ethics committee. Those forms, by the way, are on Moodle. So there's a link to all those forms on the Moodle webpage of this module. There used to be a lecture on the ethics forms in this module, like where we show you each form and like how to fill out your name, how to put in the date, how to describe what it is you're doing. But I took that lecture away because I thought it would be like a form of like sort of death by PowerPoint thing. I don't think we need to have a special lecture on how to fill out those forms. But just so you know, those forms are all on the Moodle page, and there's a link to them on the Moodle page. We're not going to go over how to fill them out, because I think we'd all kill ourselves with boredom, basically. It's to save my own life, so I don't die of boredom. Yeah. Anyways, there's an ethics implication. You need permission to do this. You can't just do this without permission, right? That's the idea. Here's an actual ethnographic study. This is from 1977. And let's watch it first. This might sound like a long time ago, and it is a long time ago, 1977. Let's see here. Is this going to work? Oops. Turn up the volume.
Place 150 originals, but wait a minute, I have a number of originals. Face up. Place all originals against the left wall. We want two-sided copies. Unload top paper tray. Now, do we want them collated? What? Reverse order the originals? You gotta be kidding. This is definitely a bug. That's a start. Does that relate to that? Unload top paper tray. That's not the paper tray. It didn't say what's a paper tray. Unload top. Did you reset? Oh, shit. So now, you just started it all over again, so it doesn't remember that it's doing this on the other side or anything. Maybe it just knows it anyway. Well, our first batch. Our first batch. It's SOL. What is that? Shit out. I knew it was going to be something clever like that. I knew that when I was here. Yeah, we sure did come up with a lot of paper.
So that's just an example of a kind of classic ethnographic study. It's putting a camera in the photocopying room, oops, and then watching it to see if people can use the photocopier, right? To see if it's working and where people stumble on the photocopier. The reason I like this example so much is because this is still a problem, and I still see this all the time. So you go to the printers upstairs here, and you can see people pressing different buttons, trying to figure out how it works, trying multiple times to print things, including myself, by the way. I'm not excluding myself. This is still an unsolved problem. Printing is still an unsolved problem. And I still struggle to get the printer to work here today, like upstairs. Has anybody else had printing problems before? I have them all the time, all the time. If my life depends on the printer, I'm a dead man, absolutely dead. Anyways, it's a fun kind of example of an ethnographic study, people watching the printer. And you can also watch people try to get the printer to work. It's fun just to watch people to try to get it to work. So there is an analysis stage. So after you've collected your study, you want to keep obviously a notebook and take notes and that sort of thing. And you want to have some goals, like what are you trying to get out of the study before you set it up or before you engage in the study. You want to discover patterns of behavior. What do people do that is relevant to your research question or design? What are people trying to do and struggling with, getting frustrated with, failing to do and doing inefficiently? Right? That's easy to, usually that's quite easy to see. Like, what are people not able to do? They're not able to print. Right? Usually when I go to print something, it takes multiple attempts. Like I said, set print on my machine, go to the machine, check, something's gone wrong, go back to my office, try it again, go back, refill the paper, refill the toner, try it again, like all sorts of things go wrong. In ethnographic studies, a common outcome is an in-depth description of a culture or a group. The focus is on culture, language, norms, and behavior, in particular those that are different from a wider culture. In the case of your projects, usually what you're trying to understand is how people behave or interact with software or hardware. And usually there's some sort of task. Like for the printer example, that's like printing 100 pages or photocopying 100 pages or whatever. But in your project dissertations, there's usually a task. Like, can this person use this VR headset? What happens when this person puts on this VR headset? Are they able to perform a task or navigate a virtual world? Or if we put somebody in front of this piece of software, can they actually use it? Can they actually accomplish a task with that? And where does it go wrong? So again, this is a very big topic, and there's a lot of literature on this topic, and we just give a quick introduction to ethnography and observational studies. We don't cover it in depth. So a lot of you will be conducting user studies and maybe developing some software or designing some software and then testing it with users. Those are user studies, right? To find out the usability, to see if people can actually use whatever software it is that you're designing or implementing. So as soon as you start testing it with users, it's called a user study. And hopefully a lot of you saw that already in coursework 1. You might have seen user studies or software being tested with users. The interesting thing is a lot of software is not really tested with users in the real world, let's say. In the real world, there's a kind of slogan, the users are the testers. So you might have noticed a lot of software is not tested with users before it's released. Or it's released with known bugs and known crashes and so on. Microsoft Teams is a good example of that. It has lots and lots of bugs and crashes and so on. One of the most common research evaluation tasks in computer science is evaluating software with users. There are other ways to evaluate software, like, for example, comparison with previous software, measuring accuracy, performance time, memory footprint, and so on. Those are all types of evaluation that we talked about as part of coursework 1. Right? We talked about different ways. It could be a software-centric evaluation, but it can also be a human-centric evaluation. You could say like hardware-centric, software-centric, machine-centric, and human-centric. And the focus of this is user studies. Again, this is a topic that can be its own module. But some of your projects might have user studies, or all of your projects should have at least some element of a user and maybe testing your software with a user. Maybe it's not a formal user study. Maybe it's an informal user study, just getting people to use your software and then asking them their opinions. That's an informal user study. Just saying, what do you think? Do you like it? Does it serve its purpose? Is it easy to use? How difficult is it to use, and so on. And usually you're evaluating the functionality and usability of the software. That's usually the purpose of the user study. So these are the most common reasons for engaging people. You want to evaluate the effect that software has on someone. Does the software achieve something? Does it really work? Does the printer really work, for example? And you want to evaluate outcomes from a software process. Does the software produce the outputs that are useful, interesting, valuable, or original? Does it perform as advertised? I noticed in a lot of dissertations, master's and undergraduate dissertations, there's an introduction section that says why the topic they're studying is very important, and the aims and objectives of their project. But then there's a disconnect between the aims and objectives, what they say they're going to deliver, and the evaluation at the end. So those two things are directly connected and related to one another. But I notice in a lot of dissertations and projects, by the time a student is writing the evaluation section, they forgot what they wrote in the introduction, and there's a complete disconnect. Right? They might have written something in the introduction that's like, we are going to design and develop a piece of software that solves this problem and makes this task easier. Then they write the software, and then at the end there's no user engagement that actually validates the original claim. If that makes any sense. There's no users that says, oh yeah, this makes my task easier, or it solves the problem that I was worried about. So for usability can be about asking users to solve an intended task without excessive learning, so that the experience of using the software is pleasant and avoids frustration. So the best pieces of software in the world do not require excessive learning. Does everybody agree with that? Can anybody think of some examples of the best pieces of software in the world that don't require excessive learning? Anybody think of an example?
Microsoft Word.
Microsoft Word. Is that the best example that you can think of? WhatsApp. WhatsApp is probably a good example. It doesn't require much training to use WhatsApp. Microsoft Word, I think just to get the initial few words down is not much. Doesn't require any training. But as soon as you start getting things more sophisticated, like, I don't know, putting in a table of contents or something, the learning curve is quite steep. Any other better examples than WhatsApp? More successful, better examples than WhatsApp? Facebook, I guess Facebook's not a bad example, but it doesn't do anything. It's just, you just sit there and you scroll until your brain is scrambled. doesn't really accomplish anything. Another example?
I was going to say Facebook as well.
There's the best example that everybody uses every single day and doesn't require any learning or instructions. And everybody uses it multiple times a day. Anybody? Can anybody think of one? Google. Google. Google is the one. So it doesn't require any instructions, very simple interface. You just input some search term and you're done, right? This is one of the reasons it's so successful, is because it doesn't require any learning. It's a simple interface, right? My favorite example is actually an old one. It's Pac-Man. Has anybody here ever played Pac-Man? That's a nice example. You don't need instructions for Pac-Man. You see the screen, you see it for 5 seconds, you see the joystick, and you just know, boom, this is how it works. Like, it's kind of perfect example of perfect usability. So Google and Pac-Man are like two examples of the perfect user interfaces. Okay, so usually the way a user study is set up is you give a person a set of tasks. So you put them in front of a piece of software or hardware or combination, and you say, please perform the following tasks. Like, can you find out, I don't know, who won the gold medal in the swimming Olympics in 1999 or something like that. And you see how long it takes them to perform the task and if they come up with the correct or accurate answer. So all tasks are measured in terms of accuracy and response time. Gesundheit. And then if something is taking an unexpectedly long time, it means there's something wrong with the software. And if somebody's coming up with the wrong answers consistently, it also means that something is wrong with the software, the usability of the software. And it's kind of interesting with the Google example. They're always reporting the response time, like 10,000 results found in whatever 1/10 of a second or whatever, and you're just like, how is that possible? It doesn't seem possible. And then usually there's some exit interview. And by the way, you usually observe people while they're performing these tasks. So you're watching them perform the tasks, you're taking notes, you might even record them while they're performing the tasks to see like what's going wrong or what's working well. That's also a good thing. And we often separate usability from functionality. Something can be very functional but not very usable. For example, like the Linux shell, right? It's very functional, but it's not very user-friendly. That's why graphical user interfaces were invented. And sometimes things can be very usable, but not actually functional. That could be the case of a mock-up. If you design a mock-up on a piece of software before you add the functionality, which is a very good thing to do, good practice, highly recommended. And we focus on observation rather than self-evaluation. These are all questions you can ask, but they usually come at the end of a set of tasks or a user study. It's the tasks that really give you the scientific data. And what's nice about tasks is a user study with very specific tasks is reproducible. So, in other words, someone somewhere else on Earth, different time, different location, should be able to repeat the user study and get either the same results or different results, but it should be repeatable. Yeah. Sometimes this kind of think aloud protocol is used where people are saying or speaking out loud what they're doing. That's another possibility, another dimension, let's say, to a user study. You can ask users to say when they are frustrated or stuck. You can look for errors and inefficiencies. You can observe participants' facial expressions as well as what they're doing at the machine. And again, this is a big topic. Anybody that's performing a user study or an observational study, you'll have to have an in-depth discussion with your supervisor about how to set this up and how to set it up so it succeeds. And there are lots of guidelines and books about this topic. This is just a short introduction. Here's another kind of usability. This is like a little bit of a combination of usability and functionality. And it's somebody testing out a piece of software and then using I think they're using the think aloud protocol. I think they're saying like what they're thinking as they're testing the system, if I remember correctly.
Work today is broken.
Oops.
We're all working in too many disconnected apps, and it's...
Okay, my name is Jane Smith, and I am here to participate in a usability testing experiment for a physician order entry system as part of a new EHR component. So here's the main login page. I'm going to type in my credentials and log into the system. Okay, so here's my home screen. I see different things. I see a calendar, upcoming appointments, and my general profile. So I'm trying to make a new prescription. I don't see a prescription tab at the top. So I think the next best thing is going to be patients, maybe 3 individual patients. Let's just select a patient here. Okay, so here's their main profile. I think let's click into prescription tabs. Okay, so both their current prescriptions and new prescriptions are on the same page. Let's just pick a medication for them, a dose, and then start and end dates, as well as a pharmacy, I'm assuming. Okay, I filled in the information. Now I'm just looking for here the submit button. Going to confirm the submission. So we were successful in creating a new prescription. And that takes you right back to the patient profile page. So now that we've completed the prescription, I'm going to log out of the system. Here's the logout button. Confirm log out. And we're back to the main home screen page. That was fairly easy.
So that's just an example of a kind of evaluation with the think aloud protocol, where the person is speaking, you know, what they're thinking at the same time. Okay, so there are different aspects or dimensions to the evaluation, like functionality, right? Does the software do what it is designed to do? So we want to know if it's serving the purpose that it's intended to serve. That's kind of a functionality testing and evaluation, because sometimes the software is designed and implemented and it doesn't actually serve the purpose that it's intended to serve. And then another kind of aspect is, does it actually enable them to perform a task that they wanted to perform? And we just saw an example, right? That example was assigning a prescription to a patient. That was an electronic health record system. So in essence, we're trying to evaluate, were the requirements implemented correctly for the user? So this is probably an observational plus think aloud study, user study with interview questions as a part of the evaluation, right? A combination of different methods. So we already talked about interviews. We had a lecture on that. We just saw an example of the think aloud protocol, and today we're talking about observation, watching people as they use the software. So that's a combination of evaluation strategies. Sometimes the software is intended to help the user learn something. It might be to have an effect on their mood or emotions, either intentionally or unintentionally. It might just be for enjoyment and fun. And you may expect the software to help a person while they're using it or after having used it. And this can be tested directly, right? So participants in the user study can self-report on their mood and their experience of using it. And then obviously there are kinds of tests and tasks. So sometimes we're taking a test to see what our existing knowledge is, and then we're using a piece of software, and then we're taking another test after we've used the piece of software to find out if the software has educated us in some way. It could be like a financial literacy test, or it could be a visualization literacy test, or something like that. And in those kinds of scenarios, there's always a control group. So a group of people that are sort of in the typical normal setting without any interventions. And then they're compared with another group, the experimental group, that experiences something different, some part of some experimental software or hardware. And then the two groups are compared, as the results on their tests are compared to see if the experimental group experienced some improvement after they used the software. So there are always control groups. People who use a previous system or haven't used a new system as a basis for comparison with the new experimental group. Sometimes we evaluate the output of software that software produces. It might produce something. For example, an LLM that produces songs or poems, or a graphic system that produces images. The images might be evaluated somehow. And in some cases, there's human judgment that's required to decide whether the system has done a good job. That's sometimes part of the evaluation, or it could be part of a user study. So you might ask a set of users to evaluate the output of software. That's going to be the case of many of the user studies and many of the projects. This could be done using a questionnaire, but it can also be done with interviews. Sometimes there'll be a Turing test scenario. Is everybody familiar with the Turing test? What's the Turing test? Whoever's familiar with it. Is anybody familiar with the Turing test?
So, Bletchley Park in World War II, Turing, who was a computer scientist, did a test to see if you could prove it was a computer or a human who was reviewing. It's called the Turing test.
That's right, that's right. So the Turing test is something everybody should know about. Can you design a piece of software that behaves so much like a person that another person can't tell the difference? I have never seen a successful example of this, but that is the Turing test, right? Can you design hardware or software that resembles a person so much you can't tell the difference? But that's kind of the ultimate test. Right, and an example could be a poem. if a poem was written by a person or a piece of software. Like it could be a Turing test. Okay, so today we talked about ethnography, observational methods, and user studies. And there's a very good chance that this will be part of your dissertation or your projects. Your projects should have some human element to them, right? Because the software you're writing is usually for a person. Not always, but 99% of the time, it's for a person. And that means as part of the evaluation, you need to think about the users. How are you going to get the users to interact with your software as part of the evaluation? How are you going to set that up? Any questions about these topics? You'll have to talk to your supervisor about exactly your evaluation strategy, because every project is going to have a different evaluation strategy. Then none of them are going to be exactly the same. Okay, if there are no questions, if you're happy, you can go. If you're not happy, you can stay and talk to me until you're happy.